Want to say good afternoon and once again, welcome to, that's right, Wake Up Wednesday right here on 95.3 FM. Hallelujah. Hey, listen, it's your voice, it's your issues, it's your conversation. We're going to be doing it for the next 2 weeks. That's right. We're talking about what's going on. What's your thoughts on? That's right, District 8. We're going to hear from you. Those of you who are in the district, we want you to give us a call. Write down the number 850-671-1450. We want to talk to you. It's your voice. It's your call. It's your issue as we move closer to this election cycle. That's right, August 23rd, early voting starting on August 13th, and early ballots are now coming into our supervisor of election office. So we want to make sure that you can talk to us about what you feel like your issues are. And one of the things that I want to say good afternoon to our co-host today. That's right, she is the voice for community consciousness, none other than Miss Christy Henry. How are you?
Hey y'all, how are you? Hey Pastor, how you doing today?
Hey, doing extremely well. Want to say I'm doing well and glad to have you. And we're going to open up the phone lines because we're going to have callers calling in 850-671-1450. So what do you think about today's show? I mean, let's talk about it.
So, we have these conversations all the time because we in community, we're talking to people, we get the calls. I got 4 calls today regarding parents who have incoming rattlers. And they're looking for help from the outside of Tallahassee. And they're going online, they're going to the news outlets, they're going to all the different stuff. And it just really kind of helps me to understand how important it is to have identified voices in community that have connection to community, because Tallahassee is not just it's not that small town you grew up in back in the day. It is a regional market. It is a centrifuge of what they call a market service area. So that means that what happens here, it impacts Gadsden, it impacts Wakulla, it impacts Jefferson, it impacts Jackson County, it impacts all of the whole region. And so we have to start thinking differently about Tallahassee. We know we have this tug and pull of the old versus the new.
Absolutely.
And I personally think that there is a middle ground there, because anything that doesn't grow, what?
It dies.
It dies. And it's not that growth has to overshadow everything else. It's not that we can't preserve what's here. It's just that we have to be mindful that anything that doesn't grow, anything that doesn't expand, anything that doesn't germinate is regressive and is dying. And we as a community, it's a key conversation for us, because we are resistant to change. We are resistant to things that could quite frankly be beneficial. And so I know we're talking about stuff globally, but I like to kind of focus on my community. I kind of like to focus on my people, on the issues that we face. And the things that we're having to deal with in this season and in all seasons. These transcend election seasons. These are chronic issues that we as a community must understand, and then we must trust and have trustworthy voices that are setting forth the issues in a way where we can see impact and outcomes happen.
Well, I think that is so important that you said that, because one of the things that we do know is that growth is vitally important for our community as a whole. And when we take a look at where we are as a district and where we are landing out of 67 counties, I mean, we're not in the middle. We're not close to the top. We're not near the bottom. We are at the bottom when it comes to looking at how we are rated and the 32304 zip code. When we look at poverty, when we look at crime, we're there. So it's obvious that there has not been any type of growth. There have been some growth, but we have not grown to move from where we have been when we look at what's going on in our our city, in our state, and more so in our district. And I think that's the biggest focus that is important to me, is that what are the needs? I mean, I'm able to say what I feel like needs are, and I'm able to say that based on my own experience and based on on my own work that I have been doing. Because when I take in consideration, and a lot of people say to me all the time, well, great, why do you constantly are reminding people of your past experience? Why are you constantly? Because it's through that I saw what I'm seeing now. And it's through that experience that has caused me to become so engaged in our communities. Because in 1995, and here it is 2022, as you said, things haven't changed. As a matter of fact, they've changed for the worse. So it's vitally important that we begin to see how we reshape and how we restructure our community. And that's only going to happen when community voices are at the table, making known what those community needs are. And certainly we want to ask those of you who are joining us today to give us a call. 850-671-1450 is Conscious Check. And it's Christine Henry. She is hosting what we're going to talk about on today. So, and community has always been a major part of your heart. And why is that?
Well, I mean, you know, for me, again, I go back to my community as a people. When you go back to what you said earlier about the we haven't, we ain't inclusive of everybody. We's not inclusive of every demographic group, every racial category within our city. When we talk about the we talking about us. We're talking about when people talk about Frenchtown, or when they talk about the North Side, or when they talk about other areas of town where economic progression has left the community behind, and it continues, we continue to be reactive to growth as opposed to proactive with growth, and us defining as a community culturally what that growth looks like while preserving legacy spaces and legacy in inherent culture in an area. And so community is important to me, because this community raised, I mean, you know, you get raised by your parents, but you get sent to Tallahassee and you either get shot out or you get sat down. And I got sat down. And the elders, I was just thinking this morning how I was at a meeting a couple of decades ago when I was in AmeriCorps in Southside, and one of my community elders, who I will not name, but just a dear woman to me, you know, I thought I had done something. I had got up there and said something and did something, felt all good, got a clap. And she said, baby, you didn't know what the HELL you was talking about up there. Don't ever get back up in front of a group of people and don't know anything about the community that you're addressing. Now, she was being faithful to my soul, even if what she said didn't feel good. Because remember now, I just had come off that high. People were listening, and sometimes people clap for you because they just say you're a young person. They just want you to feel good, right? Absolutely. But when we talk about community, we're talking about that generational transfer of responsibility that comes through that raising, right? So when you look at me being a mentor for 17 years for girls throughout Tallahassee Southside who are now women and catalysts and change makers, when you talk about me having the ability to work with my husband, a small business that has been operational for 19 years, you know, you kind of have to own where you are. And I know we're very humble, but we have to kind of own our space and where we are. We've seen some things. You know, you get in a conversation and you hear people and they're learning and you're like, oh, I already know all of that because you've been in the trenches. And so where I'm coming from is a woman who doesn't look that old, but who really has been in the trenches, who understands the conversation. And you have to balance that with humility, because sometimes people interpret you as being a know-it-all. But no, you can see straight through that and go back to 99, back to 2001, back to 2005, back to 2007, back to 2012. And you have that valuable thing called context. So when people come bringing issues to you, you can place those issues in the context of history and have an understanding that is necessary to appropriate the conversation. So I think that there's a lot of contextual experts out there that aren't saying anything. They're letting the current environment happen. They're letting the young people have their say. But if we're being true to their souls, we're doing what my elder did to me and said, baby, if you don't know nothing, go sit down and learn something. Don't ever get up there advocating for an issue when you don't understand its impact to your community. So when I come to the table, I'm coming with the data, the statistics. I'm doing my homework. Why? Because that resonated. It hurt my feelings, but it resonated with me. And the power of owning your information is the power to catalyze change. And so I hope that we will grab that as a community and we will begin to go forth, not just with conversation, right? Not just with what we think and opinions, but with the information. You got to have your receipts, you got to have your data, you got to have your paperwork. And that's what we need as a community so that we can advocate effectively to move the issues of our community forward.
And I think that, one of the things that when we look at what you just said, having the paperwork, having the data, having the necessary tools to show what the community work looks like, it's vitally important that not only do we have all of that, but we must inform and bring others into a space of engagement so they can understand why this is so important. Yes. I mean, we cannot get so caught up in what sounds good because the rhetoric is always leading us in areas that only sets us back. Because at the end of the day, if since we're on Faith Radio, in the book of Ezekiel, it says it like this: until you can sit where I have sat, until you can understand what I'm dealing with, you'll never appreciate the place or the space that I was in. We have a lot of issues in the area that for years upon years, we've been fighting to ensure that change take place in our communities. We're fighting to bring about a community that is crime ridden, a community that is safe, an environment that is safe. We're fighting to say we got to return back to the village. But if we don't have the people who are on the ground with the necessary funding and the necessary tools that are needed, then what kind of fight are we fighting? I mean, we need the resources, we need access, and we need resources to be able to do what needs to be done. And I think that a lot of times community engagers, community influencers, they're going to do what they have to do, whether or not they're at the table or not, because community is a part of their heart. But this is a moment, this is a season, this is an hour where they have to be at the table. Yes. And they have to have the kind of representation that's going to bring them to the table and get their voices heard. Not only their voices heard, but get the resources that they need to continue to do what they need to do. I just believe that every nonprofit in our district, every 501c3 that's in the community, engaging in the community, are doing what they're doing with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Yes, and they're believing that when they take what they have and put it in God's hand, he's going to multiply it. And they keep doing it. They keep doing it. But I think the season is out. I think it's their moment. It's their time now to be able to get the resources that they need to really do. And that's one of the things that I'm really has made a part of our platform, to fight for those agencies, those nonprofits, that appropriations are made for them so that they can do what they're doing. I mean, when we look at the work that the sheriff has done with the Status of the Boys to Men's project, I mean, at the end of the day, if he would not have gathered data to put it into the face of all of those who are in positions of power and authority, and guess what? The timing was right. I just believe that if he would have did it any other time during an election year, he wouldn't have got no funding from the county, none from the city, none from the school board. But because the election cycle was here, we were facing a major crisis. Even now, you're going to step up to the plate and you're going to make your voice heard. You're going to put your money where your mouth is. And that was the perfect timing. And he was able to provide at that time what was a need that all of us could be a part of. So with that being said, I want to ask you this, because here it is. We see where we are now. You're in housing, and we see the crisis that is happening on FAMU campus. when you look at that, what I mean, we know supply and demand is always a moment whereby things are going to always be tight. But when we look at what we're seeing now, and these families are having to figure out ways to provide housing for their children, what are your thoughts on it?
I think I want to be very clear that this is a awesome challenge. And I say that it's a positive, awesome challenge because two things. First of all, FAMU's population on campus has grown.
Right.
Let's look at that. That means that the number of students they're expecting, upwards of 8,000 students on campus in Tallahassee alone, has grown. Their rate of transfer has almost tripled. The desire for students to seek housing on campus is a direct representation of the market dynamics in terms of affordability. Remember, it was cheaper to live off campus than it was to live on campus.
Absolutely.
Well, now it's flipped, right? Because the real estate market, due to powers of supply and demand, have basically gone way higher than it would be for them to just be on campus, have services, have all of those things on campus. The other piece of this is the response, right? And that's where we get to kind of culturally appropriate responses to issues in our community. Because if FAMU did not understand its population, its demographics, its student needs, then they would not have ascribed the gap funding for housing the way they did. They would not have said, oh, and they can eat on campus for the next 2 semesters for free. There's other opportunities here. Opportunities to look at the south side of town, which is in the shadow of Florida A&M University, and say, look, this university over the next 10 years trajectory is going to be a true economic driver for this community.
Absolutely.
Some of the conversation that we're having and that I've had with representative of the university is with that comes the demand for services, the demand for healthy and access to fresh food options, the demand for better accessibility to resources, health, and any other resources. So we have to kind of have a mindset of master planning our community, which goes back to what? Knowing your information, having your data, being able to sit down. Now, these things are being done for us on some levels, but how many of us are paying attention
to what's being done?
How many of us have gone online and read the quote unquote Southside Action Plan, which is the grandchild of the Southern Strategy Plan? How many of us have gone back to the documents that talk about the CRA and the South Monroe, South Adams districting? How many of us have gone through and read the neighborhood plans for the neighborhoods that have been improved over the years, starting back in the 90s? Because those are the documents that governments are referring back to, and those are the documents that impact the trajectory of growth and legacy preservation of those communities within that area. And it's not just germane to Southside, it's germane to all sides of town.
Absolutely.
So when it goes back to your original conversation about the we, right? We have to house our student neighbors. How are we benefiting from the demand that our student neighbors have to live within the shadow of their institution? Have we sat down really? Right? Because we have all these other things that we're dealing with, poverty, violence, all these things. And they're important, right? But market drivers and market forces can really absolve a lot of this, right? Case in point, Stern Street used to be a huge high point for crime and gathering and a lot of stuff. They have totally redeveloped Stern Street. Ask me if you've heard anything about crime, anything about any of that. It's student housing. It's an influx of student housing. The primary utilizers of that student housing go where? To Florida State.
Well, yeah, and I want to stick a pin in that because the opportunities that we are missing out on is because we're not collectively sitting down, getting a real understanding of what is available and how do we maximize it. And Stern Street, we all remember, it had a history of, like you say, of crime. But look at it now. And there are a whole lot of streets that's going to look just like Stern Street. and they've already been in plans for it. So I think that our key to understanding how do we move forward is really keeping people informed, making people knowledgeable of what they need to know about when it comes to community engagement and community involvement. And don't act like it's a surprise, because these things been in the work for years upon years.
Let me throw two numbers out for you. Florida A&M University has 2,450 units for student housing. 2,450 units for student housing. They have a population influx on campus attendance upwards of 8,000 or more. What's the gap between 2,450
Wow.
and 8,000? Even if you cut out the ones that are local already stay here,
You still don't have enough housing.
you still don't have enough housing. And so the opportunity here is going back to knowing the data, knowing the numbers. How did I learn this? I talked to FAMU. I didn't get it from the street committee. I didn't get it from secondary sources. I was able to get in reach with the primary at FAMU and discuss this, and they gave me the numbers. They also gave me, as they perceive, where the opportunities are. We keep talking about the problems, but we're not looking at the opportunities that the problems are presenting.
Right. Because whenever there's a problem, there's definitely an opportunity for a solution. But we have to be able to bring ourselves to the table so that we can see how do we solve it. And one of the things that we must realize, and I think this is vitally important when we talk about community, because the center of our community is definitely our faith units, our churches. And once we can really engage them to understand there's no more land being built, the supply and demand for housing is great. And everybody's talking about affordable housing. There's some things that we know we're not going to be able to change in legislation. It's just absolutely not going to happen when you have 80 Republicans and 40 Democrats. But what we do know is that if collectively with these churches, if they can really understand the value that they can offer to the university or to our community by collaborating, right, then we can begin to start developing our own communities with housing in the shadow of the university that can house these 8+ thousands of students that are arriving into our cities. We got a call on the line. Good afternoon, caller. Good afternoon, caller. We're doing absolutely amazing. Can you hear us? Wonderful. Okay, well, joining us on the line is another community engager, and that is Talithia Edwards. Good afternoon. Hey, absolutely. We're talking about something that is so important to us, and we're talking about the value of we're talking about the value of our communities being engaged in housing. We're talking about the crisis that we're finding ourselves in. You are in the heart of the community, and one of the things that housing in our area is difficult. What were your thoughts when we found ourselves in this situation that we're in with our students at FAMU, and what kind of, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to understand, and in talking again with FAMU, they're focused on what their role is. And what is their role as it pertains to housing and student affairs? Is to curate and to produce and to manage housing that is within their asset portfolio, right? A lot of their housing is, people don't live like they used to live on campus, Talithia, when you shared a room with somebody, had to walk down the hall with shower shoes and, did all that. People don't live like that no more. So the housing on campus is functionally obsolescent. So, and when I say that, it means that people don't live like that no more. Ain't nobody buying that. You got to compete with what's on the market as well. So a lot of the housing that is in has a lot of deferred maintenance that they're working on, trying to get state funding. So to your point, we need to support FAMU to get appropriate funding so that they can do what they need to do with existing housing on campus to bring it up to modern standards so that it is valuable housing that students will invest and pay for, which they're doing. They're doing it. But there's a lot of housing that does need to be redeveloped on campus. But right now, they got 2450 units. 2450 units. That's what they got. And those are ready for occupancy. Those are functionally capable units for students to live in. Florida State don't have enough housing for their students either. They don't house every 80,000 student that go there, do that. But what they've done is that over the years, they saw that challenge of growth as an opportunity, and they partnered with their boosters to be able to work in partnership with the city and the county to incentivize development, mixed development that housed students and gave them environments to live, work, and play, which is where you get the college town concept from. People hated college town, right? But college town's tax base generated over $1 million to the CRA to reinvest in where?
University.
Well, no, to reinvest in neighborhoods. So I mean, we have to you get what I'm saying? You have to understand how this stuff works so that when people throw stuff out there, it's not reactive. You have a context where you can put that in. Yeah, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about this is the way? And Talithia leads the Greater Bond neighborhood. Can you talk a little bit about how Greater Bond factors into this picture in the long term as it relates to housing student neighbors in the shadow of the university?
Right, I think that's the greatest opportunity for the university. Our neighborhood being right there in the backyard before they kill us. We got 23 city-owned properties, right? There's a park for them. Yeah, we talk about combining the schools and greater funding to actually bring the housing up. Think about the apartment complexes of the multi-family units that we have there that renovated to create student housing. There's a lot of opportunities in the neighborhood, literally, where a parent could feel afraid that a kid isn't they're off campus, but they ain't off campus, right? Throw a rock in 2 seconds. And I think that is where the thoughts to happen, right? What is in my backyard? What do I have access to, right? What resources do I have to actually create some partnerships or leverage what I have to do exactly what you talked about with the Christian that's happening on Main Street with college town. If we do have opportunities here, with what exists that just may need to be renovated or opportunities for new construction because the space is available.
Right. And I think that is so important for us to have the kind of conversations that we're having. One of the things someone asked me the other day, they said, what is it that you would do if elected for office for FAMU? I said, well, first of all, me personally, I would have to sit down with the powers to be, those who are in positions of authority, to find out what the needs are. I mean, I wouldn't want to just make recommendations or suggestions of what I would do. I would want to know what it is that's really needed that we can go to work as a community and a university and fight for to make sure that that is done. And I think that, having you all on today, community consciousness conversation with Christique and talking about this, I think, Talithia, you said there are 23 available housing opportunities right there in the shadow. And guess what happens when those neighborhoods are redeveloped? It creates a whole different outlook, and it creates a concept now where we are really taking care of those students there, because now we feel like they're back in a village. And now we have, and that's what we can see, that's what we can sense, that's what we can feel. So that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. Another thing, let's talk about this right quick, because I feel that this is highly important when it comes to public school funding, when it comes to workforce, when it comes to training and development. I think, oh God, I think the biggest issue for me, Talithia, Christique, is that being real. Just recognizing what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a totally Republican House, a total Republican Senate, a total Republican government staff team. It's there. If we don't put ourselves in a position to be able to work across the aisles to see that what the needs are for our district is met, we're going to find ourselves constantly moving in a direction that I would call, as the children of Israel, wandering in a wilderness. And we're way far from what the needs of our communities are.
Well, I'm going to definitely want to hear from Talithia on this, as she works very closely with the Title I schools, which predominate our areas that we are looking at it on the regional basis. And we're not just talking about just District 8 or just Southside. We're talking about all over, right? The question for me, and this is what we would like to throw in, an audience, everybody looking at what we want y'all to throw in too. What do you think is the responsibility of the district representative on the state level, of the Senate representative of the state level, as it regards advocating for educational enhancement, educational opportunity, educational resources within this district? And understanding that we have a very active and advocacy, spirited school board, right? But what are the top things that you understand are the role of advocacy and partnership with our school board through the Florida legislature? That's what I would want to find out from the community, so that they understand what your role is in that space as you represent agency and organization and bureaucracy on the state level in that manner. I just feel like we just need to throw it out there. I'm just saying.
The actual responsibility of the representative is definitely to advocate and ensure in some way that the policies and are in place for those schools in the school board are actually able to make decisions for themselves to what they need and we need in our own areas, right? Y'all know. I work closely with Title I. I did in Title I. And what I see happen a lot of times is people making decisions for us and what we need to be doing, right? And not really understanding what's happening. Right now, around us, and I think when we get these macro decisions being made and trickle down to the micro, it doesn't translate. We're not seeing success. We're thinking we should see, because the people who are doing the right thing actually just moving those macro level decisions. So I think actually advocating on the part for locally for us to make decisions for ourselves would be done. That's going to create success for how it's good for us. What
Well, I just like to add this, because I think that is so important, because a lot of times when we look at the needs, if we haven't identified, then, as you said earlier, we're making decisions that really are not even conducive for those who are working in our Title I schools, those who are working in our communities with our parents, with our children, until we all are at the table hearing from those and understanding why it's important that those who are speaking, why it's important that we adhere to what they're saying. It's important because why? They are the ones who are boots on the ground. They're the ones who are doing the work. And it's hard for us to make a decision without even hearing from them. And I think that if we're going to really move our state, if our city, if our county, if we're going to move in an area where we can really see real change, then we have to have everybody sitting down to understand what the needs are. And then we advocate based on those needs. If the need is not shoes, then why are we talking about coats?
You better say,
okay. If the need is shoes, then every time my mouth open, it ought to be about shoes. And I think it don't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
And I want to tie in these conversations, the housing and education conversation, because what we don't realize, those of us that are on the ground, what's happening above us, our head, is a conversation about tying, because we may know this because it's real estate and development, tying affordable housing, community development to choice. Y'all know what that means? If that happens, if we're able, they're able of whoever's making the people to incentivize educational incentives for individuals who move in a community like ours. I asked the question when I heard that, well, what happens to on elementary or the middle school if people who are able to move into the neighborhood can just go whatever they want because they're receiving out there? And they say that's a school district problem, not our problem. I'm quoting words that I heard, right? So people want I believe in schools, I believe in educational opportunities because I believe that kids learn different, families have different needs. So I'm not speaking for or against whatever particular thing is. I'm asking all the questions because we do understand that our local schools being valuable and we see that they have a great access that plays a role in how buy homes in our area. So they play a vital role, so we can't discount that. But imagine communities like Bob will have about an 83-87% renters rate, and we're trying to increase our home ownership. And if it was done through some mechanism by which you say, okay, come on the line, houses being developed, and I'm choosing to live on because guess what? I'm going to bypass the school. So I'm going to invest in here, and I'm going to go wherever I want to go. What does that look like for our community? What does that look like for our children? It's a greater implication of the conversations we have because they are being had already for communities like ours. Who are trying to change the development world and continue the process.
And we can really go into that a lot deeper, and we probably need to do it on a town hall format because when you look at the legacy of colonialism, of systemic just racism, redlining, appropriation of housing, planning, urban planning, the impact of urban renewal on communities of color. There's a whole planning trajectory that trickles down now into what you just saying, right? There's a historic context to this conversation. And it really goes back to the question of who has value? Where do we put value, right? Where do we invest in play? Well, how do we assess value? And if there's a systemic cultural bias toward value being placed here as opposed to here, and then we go back and we look at the way that systems of government are set up, and they're set up to basically make schools and communities suffer, right? For the diversity of learning experiences, learning capabilities, learning, environments that students experience in school and out of school in pursuit of this thing called standardization. And now this pursuit causes me, homeowner who's bought a property over here, to have to deal with regressive valuation because we're being pumped in the media. Nobody wants to live anywhere where they're down an A-rated school zone. That is a value issue. And it goes back to the soul of colonialism, of systemic racism, of the redlining issue, the capital desert issue. We don't value equitably. And when we have that, then we're at this, we don't see that it's okay for people to have choice and for people to be relegated to zoning, right? We think that it's a lose, it's either a win-lose situation. Right. And so I really, and so it goes back to my original question. What is the role of the advocate in place for state leadership as it relates to working in partnership with local leadership to ensure and to curate equity in place?
Well, I think one of the keys to it is being able to do just what we're doing now. We're being able to be informed. We're being able to be educated on what is the values of the community. And once we're able to do that, then I think the next thing that we've got to do is to really ensure that we're able to bring those who are not a part of our culture to understand what our needs are. I mean, until people really understand what the needs are, then guess what? They'll continue to do what they're doing. And to have someone that can say to those who are in positions of authority and power, you know, until you come over into this neighborhood, until you sit down with some of the people in this neighborhood, you're really not going to get a full picture of it. Mm-mm. And once you get a full picture of it, then your whole outlook is going to change. And I think that as we move forward, we've got to have these conversations, not just at a local level, but we got to have them at a state level. We got to have sit-down conversations with those who, from the governor's office to the Speaker of the House to the Senate President to whoever needs to hear our message, so that we can ensure that the community is being empowered so that the necessities of our community are being met on a day-to-day basis. I think Talithia said something. What does it look like when you can move into our neighborhoods, but you don't have to attend our school?
There's a lot of work being done. A lot of work being done in this community on so many levels that, you know, these conversations are happening with our kids. Working on the ground, you know, trying to make it every day. What we're showing up for life. Serving the organization, like, all of that's happening. Like, all the data get made for people who are actually on the ground doing the work, and then you get these high level decisions that are making
yes.
and it's affecting us, and that's what that is, right? I think it's great. You have to hear from the people, you know, what's happening and what's going on in that place in order to know how to move it. But what we value, what is the value? And that what we value. And a lot of times it ain't what other people value, right? It doesn't look like what they think people value. And so as I move on in the full on here the conversation, really get to the specific issue with the work that needs to be done.
I think that we're in a moment, and this is just spiritually speaking. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that I know is that we're in seasons where we got to lean not to our own understanding, but in all of our ways, we got to acknowledge him. Why? Because he wants glory. And I think we're in a moment, we're in a time whereby this is an hour whereby the body of Christ and all of our advocates, all of our nonprofits, all of those who are in the community, this is a moment whereby unifying to make sure, to make sure that our communities return back to what community feels like. I think Christy gave a beautiful description of it earlier on in the program. Is back to what it looks like. I mean, when we look back, a lot of times we say we don't want to go back, But there are times when we need to look back at where we was, when schools were schools, when families were families, when communities were communities, and see how do we model that in this hour. Because right now, when we look at communities, I mean, you know and I know that the average person don't even feel safe in the community. I was talking with a young man named Sam. Sam said by 6 o'clock, I want to be home in my house. And he lived in the Bond community. But there were moments in time where the community was a safe haven for everyone. And I just feel and believe that it does not call for us to become so much of pipe dreamers to people, when the real reality is that this is what we really have to do. We really have to. And I keep saying this because I know how I felt when I was at the table sharing a perspective from a place that I came from. The people who were at the table with me was not in that space, so they couldn't understand it. So I had to keep repeating myself. I had to keep sharing with them. I had to keep answering questions until they understood it. Then I had to say, come on, let's take a trip together. Let me let you see that these men who are out here doing what they are doing, they don't want to do that. Necessity breeds necessity. But if there are opportunities available for them, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to help transform their whole lives. I said, but until you understand it, then guess what? You'll make decisions that really and truly is going to cause them to move further away from a place of destiny. And I think that today brings us into a place of really finding those stakeholders, bringing to the table to say, how can we empower each other? Not how do we keep being divisive, because being divisive is, you know what that is. It's the plan of the enemy, and that's what he wants. I mean, at the end of the day, if he keep us divided, if he keep us fighting, then guess what? We'll never unite to be the kind of communities or be the kind of schools or have the kind of opportunities that we should have, because we're constantly warring with each other. And we're making that statement, crabs in a barrel, become true.
Well,
Wow.
I mean, and you know, both you, Greg, and Talithia, you know, we're looking at times where public policy is dictating outcomes. That is kind of unprecedented, all right? When you have, because back in the day, you know, you didn't have this much heavy-handedness as it relates to government policy. It was very clear what the role of government is. Protection, infrastructure, you know, making sure that the budget's balanced and things like that, right? Taxation. Now, everybody's expectation of government is so big. It's like government is the savior. I can't do nothing unless the government's involved. I can't be nothing unless the government's involved. I can't move forward unless the government's involved. So we're dealing with very, very, very weird terrain, right? Because when you have that mindset, if you don't have access and connection to government in the way you need it, you're frozen, right? Or you're operating on the black internet, right? You're operating on the dark side. And so I think the pathway to freedom is understanding that the power of your innovation, the power of your independence, the power of your ability to be a thriving citizen and to make and to utilize your skills and your talents and your capabilities bring value to this community. The government doesn't bring you value. You bring value to government. You bring value to your community. You are the agent of opportunity here. The role of government is to ensure that you are safe, that there is proper infrastructure, and that there is proper governing so that budgets, taxation, and all those things are appropriated in a way that does not hinder the ability for your human capabilities to spring forth. And when you have that continual wall here, we've got to figure out how we get around that wall, because that's the greatest barrier. If we're looking at government as agent of equity and government is the primary barrier to equity, what do we do with that?
Well, listen, we are out of time, but I know we're not out of word. We're going to finish this conversation on next week. Why? Because it's so important that we began to see ourselves at the table. We begin to see ourselves as a community valuable We begin to see our organizations as valuable, our leaders who are on the ground as valuable, and your value is going to give us what we need when it comes to government working hand in hand to make sure that the vision for our community comes to full fruition, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's education, whether that's workforce and housing, whether that's affordable housing, whatever that looks like. You're valuable as a community to be at the table. You're valuable, and you feel less valued because why? You haven't been at the table. You feel less valued because your needs have been overlooked. You feel less valued because nobody has been paying you attention. But this is an hour where your value is coming to the table with me, because I know what it means to feel less valued. I know what it means to feel not to be heard. So we are in a fight together. And I feel like as we fight together, we're going to win together. So I want to encourage you all to keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much. This is an amazing show. It's Consciousness with Christique. And today, Talithia, it's important that our district and our community know that there is a voice that was at one point voiceless. But now that I'm off mute, I got off mute in 2018 because I got the right to vote. And because I got the right to vote, I understand the power of that right to vote. And here it is in 2022, I'm seeking to become the next state rep. So that means I'm off mute, and my volume is going to be amplified by bringing the valuable people to the table to help ensure that we keep value in our communities, in our schools, and doing what needs to be done to make our communities safe and better. Hey, this has been Greg James, and this has been the Greg James Community Show. Last and final words, 30 seconds. Talithia, what is it that you want to say?
This is a great conversation. I think more of these conversations need to happen on a large scale. The next is going, all year round. And in political season, outside of political season, I know that the Greg James Community Show can relate topics like this, but these are good conversations to have, because people are paying attention and people are listening and they want to be involved in these conversations. So thank you for having it, having these conversations, elevating the word and doing what you all are doing. I love both of you.
All right. Thank you so much, Talithia. Closing words, and we're out of here.
We love y'all. We're here for y'all, and we're going to keep working for and with everybody. Thank you, Talithia, for all you do on the community level.
All right. Well, until next week, stay blessed, and remember, walk in the favor of God. And remember this, I'll keep working for you.